Thank you. My name is Chris Barnes. I'm Director of Cloud for CenturyLink Technology Solutions. I'm going to have to make sure I say that name correctly because previously we were Satis up until January of this year. So some of you may know Satis. We're an international global provider. We are owned by CenturyLink, which is the third largest telco in the United States. We obviously do cloud, we do managed hosting and services, and we do network. So a bit of information about me. I've been in IT now for about 18 years. Been working in Asia probably about 13 years, living in Singapore for 11 Been with CenturyLink Technology Solutions for a little over 1 year. Prior to that, I've worked at HP, Microsoft, Red Hat, and in Australia I was in system administration for a number of commercial and government organisations, including Department of Defence. I've actually held defence security clearance and been providing consultancy services to customers. So I'm here today to talk a little bit about the view from a cloud service provider. So CenturyLink, formerly Satis, we've been in the cloud game for a number of years. Our very first generation of cloud was released, I think, back in 2009. We're actually up to our fourth generation of cloud. There's been some trials and efforts along the way, but we are really pleased in terms of the journey we've come on and where we are at the moment with our current cloud. I'm not going to do a product pitch by any means. I'm really going to share with you some of the learnings that we have gone through in terms of security. And a slide I really wanted to start with is this one here. It's a picture which really resonates with me when I think about security. I identify with this guy in the front boat because when I think about the security landscape, it feels like that at times. You're a little bit isolated. You're paddling furiously, you're trying to get to an objective, and there's dangers that are all around you and you don't know where they're coming, you may not even see them. And I think this really encompasses the security landscape at the moment. If you turn back the clock about 15 years ago, the main motivation for attacks was really about notoriety. You think back to the movie War Games with Matthew Broderick, and people used to attack organisations, companies, providers, really about that claim of involved in that successful attack. Where we are today, though, that's really diminished, and the attacks that we are seeing across the landscape that I'm sure many of you are aware of is really two prime reasons. One is geopolitical, and what's now known as the post-Snowden era. People are now hyper aware of the fact that governments, whether on the east or the west, really have geopolitical motivations for trying to gain access to people's systems and the personal and confidential data that they contain. The second area is obviously financial. So notoriety is really fallen by the wayside, and geopolitical and financial motivations are really what's driving the landscape that we're seeing today. And another thing that I really think about is how do you defend against that? What are some of the best practices that you can be thinking through and adopting in your own operations, whether you're a customer or a provider? Probably the main question I often get asked, is just right across the board, whether it's internally with the sales teams as they're positioning our products, this is with customers, this is with partners, is the cloud secure? And the answer to that is really from two perspectives, and ultimately it depends. And it's why standards like SS584, I think, are very good for the industry, because it helps understand whether cloud is secure or not. When I think back, when I think about the security landscape and what I was mentioning before, as I'm sure many of you are aware, security is an ongoing journey. Again, 30 years ago, if I wanted to rob a bank, I needed physical access to that bank. I needed to know where it is and, with a gun or something else, go in and rob the bank. When you think about today, and again, that, financial motivations, geopolitical motivations, it's all virtual. It's all done online. You can be attacked from anywhere in the world. And what that then means is you've got to have the best-in-class security mechanisms in place. You no longer have the luxury of just having something that's half done. You've got to be doing as good, if not better, than all the attackers that are out there today. And so if you think about doing that yourself, if you're a customer and you've taken on the responsibility of putting a secure environment in place, that's a really tough thing to do nowadays. That involves hiring smart people that know what they're doing. That requires investments in the right hardware, software, environments, all of that. And it's an ongoing journey. You no longer have the luxury of just putting something in place and forgetting about it. You've got to continue to invest in security. And so that is, in my mind, one of the big benefits that a service provider brings then to customers, is because we take on the ownership of that. And so then it comes down to, as a consumer of those services, do you trust us? Do you see us as somebody that puts in place those best-in-class security, that continues to invest and update our systems and continues to protect ourselves and our customers? And do we continue to do that? So that's again why, in my mind, these standards are good, because it helps customers and consumers of cloud services make informed decisions about whether they perhaps trust this vendor or not. So what do we do as an organisation as we think about this landscape? At the end of the day, it is really a holistic approach, and it's the same principles that, as a customer, if you're doing security on-premise, really starts with a security and governance framework, an overarching plan that you put in place that then starts to dictate all the various elements around how you ensure best-in-class security across that. And so the way we look at it, and for those of you that have seen the multi-tier clouds standards so far, you'll see some similarities between what we do and what you've seen within this document. And that's, to some extent, to be expected. There's a lot of commonality in terms of the areas you need to think about and the parts you need to focus on. From our standpoint, we really think about it from three core areas. Number one, what are we doing in terms of our corporate infrastructure and systems? And this relates to things that the employees are accessing on a regular basis. So, laptops, servers, network, etc., etc. The second area then is around the administration environment. And this is not just, and it's kind of like a go-between then between the corporate environment and the public-facing services that you may be providing to customers. And that could encompass, things like the billing system and your CRM systems or email systems and things like that, as well as then the overriding environment in which you're managing those offerings, whether they're managed services or cloud offerings to your customers. And then finally, it's around the customer-facing products themselves. So this is a really, this is an approach that almost in CenturyLink Technology Solutions adopts at its core. Just to give a little bit of a background in terms of who we are as a company, we manage on behalf of our customers some of the largest brands in the world. We also are very focused on organisations that have very high security requirements. To give an example, the Department of Defence is one of our customers in the US. For more than 40% of the market data transactions of foreign currencies, so the FX markets globally, more than 40% of that is transacted on our platforms. This includes our co-location platform, our managed hosting platform, as well as our cloud platform. As you would envision, with examples like that, we've got customers who absolutely care about security. And obviously they come to us because they see us as a trusted provider. And it's partly, how we're able to service those requirements is through this type of a framework. So let's go through these three areas a little bit more in depth, so I can explain again how we approach things, and so you as either providers or consumers of cloud can then start to think about that. And as I mentioned, a lot of these you'll see is really drawn forth from the standards that Martin was talking about. So the corporate infrastructure, we really think about a holistic approach in terms of who we hire, how we hire, things like confidential policies are in place. How people have access to system. How are those measures and controls put in place? What do we do in terms of training and education? One of the things that we do as a company is we do phishing scans on internal employees. So we send phishing emails to employees, so we actually see who inadvertently clicks on them. And then we walk them through when they, and some people do, because, they may be non-technical or they may not be educated. And when they click on them in a very, kind of condemning way, we then walk them through what we've done and what to look for in terms of, if it was a real phishing scam and what to look for and who you should be notifying in the event that you receive information like that. We make sure that we are adhering to compliance with and our governance framework. And this is, part of the broader industry accreditations that we do look to we do look to get. So we're ISO 27001 certified, PCI DSS compliant. There is a certification standard course SSAE 16, formerly SAS 70, was renamed to or repurposed to SSAE 16, which is a US specific standard, but there's an equivalent international version of that called ISAE 3402, which is a mouthful. And there are a couple of variants within that, Type 1 and Type 2, and we make sure, and they're aimed at providers, and particularly service providers with the Type 2 SOC certification, and we make sure that we adhere to those mechanisms and requirements that they put in place. And similarly, as we then start to look at Singapore, it's why we'll be interested in the standard here, because it's all about ensuring, number one, that we're meeting the needs of the market, and number two, making sure that we do have the best industry practices that we're putting in place. When we think about the administration environment, one of the key areas that I think we differentiate ourselves versus some other cloud providers out there, we create a very isolated environment between our corporate infrastructure, our management of our cloud offerings, and then the environment that we're actually providing to our customers. If you don't do that, what you run the risk of is that if somebody penetrates your cloud environment, and that could be, let's take an example, infrastructure as a service environments, and so you've got customers who may not be putting in the best configuration or controls in place. That environment gets penetrated and you're running very similar technologies or the same types of technologies across the environment in which you're then managing your cloud offering. You run the risk of the hacker not just penetrating that one customer, suddenly gaining access to multiple customers, and then suddenly gaining access across your entire environment. So that isolation is really critical, and it's not just within the cloud offering itself where you've got a multi-tenanted scenario and the ability to create pure isolation between one customer using the same underlying hardware node and another customer using the same underlying hardware node. As I mentioned before, isolation even against that management and network environment. We make sure that we're providing hardening of all of the things that we're providing to our customers. When you think about cloud, remember there's three levels of categorization that are commonly adopted: infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, software as a service. And the onus upon the provider actually varies based upon that. As an infrastructure as a service provider, we really, are responsible. The roles and responsibilities for us are really up to the level of the hypervisor. After that, we're supposedly meant to provide, the operating system and then let customers go from there. As a platform as a service provider, you've actually got more roles and responsibilities in terms of what you're providing to that end consumer, and similarly with software as a service. That being said, we also do managed services on top of our cloud, so we're able to help customers, particularly those that may not, as I mentioned before, have those best-in-class knowledge in-house. We're able to help them in terms of setting up the right environment and helping them configure and administer that and maintain it over time. And that maintenance includes, things like threat detection, application of patches, and so forth. But all of those really come down to a level of onus that providers should be taking on behalf of their customers in terms of providing a secure cloud offering that, again, the customers have a sense of confidence in terms of what they're providing them. Another key area that we're certainly seeing a lot of questions from the industry around, which relates to this particular tenant, is around deletion of data. So if I go to a provider and obviously I've got data that's kind of residing in the cloud, what happens then if they take that data away, if I go to another provider? What are the measures and controls and processes that you have in place that then zeroes that data out? Or are you at risk of, suddenly the next customer comes along and, gains access to the disk that you're using and is able to, strip data out that may be sensitive or confidential to you. So all of that comes, is really important, and these are questions that we're certainly getting from customers, particularly those with a high level of awareness and understanding of this market, and certainly we're as a provider, you should certainly be thinking through. And then finally, from the customer-facing side, the products and services themselves. Again, in this post-Snowden era, it's almost amazing to me, on one hand, but then not so much having been in the industry for so long. There are so many gaps that need to be filled in the industry. Security is an industry-wide concern. And, as a provider that focuses on enterprise customers, we make sure that we're sourcing, whether it's hardware or software or intellectual property and things like that, we're sourcing it from sources that we trust. But as the post-Snowden era is kind of highlighted, some of those sources themselves were not even aware that there were breaches within their product. And so again, it comes back to an industry-wide collaboration that needs to go on to ensure that products that are providing, particularly the downstream versions of that, which for us we consume software from VMware, we consume hardware from vendors like Dell and HP and Cisco and so forth. So what are we doing to make sure that our end product to our customers, who ultimately are contracting with us, so we are taking on that risk of providing a quality product, what are we making sure that our upstream products are secure and we trust them? Also, there's a security about development, the onus around development. Obviously, we draw a lot of product and draw upon a lot of products from the industry, but we do our own development in-house in a number of areas. A new version of our cloud, we've got a front-end portal, which is developed internally. A lot of that orchestration and automation software is developed within our. Fortunate to be working at Microsoft at the time where when I joined them, they were arguably the worst software provider in the world in terms of security. And by the time I left them, arguably they were one of the best in the industry and really leading that. And there was a number of things that they did as an organisation in terms of changing their practices. They started measuring their developers on the security of their code. Rather than just simply features and functionality. They started, adopting what is now considered industry best practice around Patch Tuesday. So rather than release a whole bunch of patches, whenever, providing a process of releasing that out to the market, which allows customers to consume those patches in a much easier manner. And so these are things, again, if you're doing any in-house development, you should be looking at some of those industry best practices out there and adhering to them and internalising them and adopting them. One of the big things that we obviously pride ourselves on around our industry response, I talked before about training. One of the areas that we do is around industry response training. So making sure that, as part of this ongoing threat management and, health checks and penetration testing that we're doing, on our own systems and on behalf of our customers, what happens if something goes wrong? And so, it's great, you can have all the right systems in place, but when something goes wrong, that's, where it really matters at times, and sometimes speed is the essence. And so we make sure that we're training our staff and drilling our staff in those types of scenarios so that we can respond appropriately rather than in the heat of the moment and respond very, very quickly. And then obviously, finally, around third-party audits and adherence to industry standards. And so as I mentioned before, we have a number of security accreditations. We're also part of the Cloud Security Alliance, for instance, and it's why we'll be very interested in looking at our certification here in Singapore when we release our new version of our cloud, probably at the end of Q2, Q3. Sorry, that was a little bit of a product hype, but that comes out by default sometimes. So some key takeaways I wanted to really leave people with. Everybody should know the term defense in depth, and I think that absolutely, it is so true. It's really about a layered approach. It's really about multiple approaches, multiple mechanisms in place. Really about taking different technologies and bringing them together to provide, as I mentioned before, the best-in-class security. It's something that, like I said, I think is a passion, and increasingly in the industry we're going to see a lot more threats. We're going to see things like the Snowden revelations come to light, and organisations that really adopt security as an ongoing process, I think, are going to come out at the end of that. Adherence to industry standards and accreditations obviously is very important. It does a number of things. It helps your customers understand what is it that you do. Obviously, they may not be fully informed in this space. They know they want a secure cloud provider, but they don't know what that means. So, having some trust through industry bodies in terms of what you offer, I think is really, really important. But it's not that's not where it should stop. There are some industry standards are a good starting place, but sometimes standards just take a while to develop, so they may not be on the forefront in terms of the latest attacks, the latest threats. So it's a good starting point, but then you shouldn't just, once you get that accreditation, kind of stop there. You need to continue to invest. I think transparency is critical. As I was doing the slide last night, and I saw Martin's first slide, the word transparency, and for me, I think this is really important. I think, particularly in this landscape where there's information flows so quickly, and you never want to be as a vendor, you never want to be found out. In the event that something happens, despite your best efforts, I think that transparency in terms of something that's gone wrong, I think communicating that to your customers, number one, helps with you being a credible and trusted vendor. Number two, it allows then people to make informed decisions in terms of who and what you do. And thirdly, that transparency, whether it's through the standards in terms of how your cloud is done, or that transparency in terms of your processes, I think is again really important to allow people to then be making informed decisions. And then finally, as I mentioned before, and I'm going to really close with this, it's a never-ending journey. I think that picture I showed you on that first slide, and that journey never ends. In the picture, there's kind of an island. You see this guy paddling towards. For me, remove the island, because in the 18 years I've been in IT, this is just an ongoing challenge. It's an ongoing journey, and you need as a provider to continue to invest in this area, and it's certainly what the expectation we have from customers. The old adage, it takes a lifetime to build a reputation and minutes to destroy. For us, it's really about taking that to heart and really ensuring that for our customers we're doing the best that we can. We continue to invest, and we continue to be sharing with them what we're doing and how we'll continue to do better in the future. So with that, I come to the end of my presentation. Am I doing questions, Martin? Firstly, I just want to say, come to the end of your presentation. Thank you very much.